Welcome to Saltier Politics and our Best Ofs edition. We're looking back on our interview with Bloomberg reporter David Kocieniewski and how money and foreign policy are so inextricably entwined. He sums it up in a way that never gets old and can only help our understanding of what's happening today. We hope you enjoy, and we'll be back with some original content soon.
Welcome, David Kocieniewski, Bloomberg reporter, former New York Times reporter, two-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. You have been covering the money trail between the Trump family, the Trump organization, the White House, and the Kushners for quite a while. And as we're recording this today, Charles Kushner, the father of Jared Kushner, has an op-ed in the Washington Post that I suspect is a response to the book that's coming out on his family, on Ivanka and on Jared, where he defends Jared's sacrifice for the country and has basically said that Jared no longer makes money or has anything to do with the Kushner companies, and talks about the purchase of 666 Fifth Avenue, which, if you are in the New York area, you know is a monstrosity of a building on 6th Avenue. That the Kushners bought at the height of the market, or Jared bought at the height of the market when his father was in prison, which we'll get into in a second, and then really had trouble financing, was finally bailed out by a company that is owned by the Qatar government. Can you give us a little bit more color on that?
Sure. To understand the questions here, you have to look at how the Trump administration and Jared Kushner are different than any other previous administration. Usually when someone goes into the White House, they have to take their personal business holdings and either sell them or put them in a blind trust. So someone is taking care of them, but the person who is in office does not know what's going on. And that way, there's a reasonable expectation that their actions they take in office won't be muddied. They won't have an ulterior agenda to help their private wealth. The Trump administration has relaxed those rules. Ethicists have said that they are not adhering to any of the rules that have gone on for most of the country's history. For example, back in the day when Jimmy Carter was president, he had to sell his peanut farm because people said, well, he could have an agriculture bill that helps peanut farms. We don't want to have that conflict of interest. President Trump has not done that, and Jared Kushner has not done that. They say that he has recused himself by not being the head of the company, and they say that he no longer owns the assets. But a lot of them he just transferred to his family members. And if you think about that, ethicists say it doesn't really mean much, because if you want to win favor with someone, the best way other than getting them rich is to make their family members rich. So that is basically a distinction without a difference when they say that he has separated himself. So that becomes a big issue because Jared Kushner has gigantic responsibilities in the White House. He is supposedly helping negotiate Middle East peace. He's meeting with the leaders of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Israel. He travels around the world doing business deals, talking about trade deals, and every one of those either has an effect on a company, could have an effect on a company that he owns, or deals with countries and investors who they are trying to get to invest in their real estate.
Well, here's what's interesting to me, that he seems very close to Mohammed bin Salman, who is the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, who himself has gotten into quite a bit of trouble because of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist, and has become almost a pariah among certain Republicans and Democrats in Congress. But yet it seems to me that Jared Kushner is protecting them. As you know, Saudi Arabia is currently involved in a not such a proxy is not even the right word, essentially in a war with Qatar on the other side of Qatar and Yemen. And lo and behold, the Qatar government, through one of its subsidiaries, seems to have bailed out this boondoggle of 666 Fifth Avenue. Suddenly, the attitude towards Qatar was not what it was before by the administration. Is that fair to say?
Yes. 666 Fifth Avenue is, this iconic building in the Kushner story. It was their first entry into Manhattan. Jared's father, Charlie Kushner, got involved in a political scandal, did time in prison in New Jersey. And when he got out of prison, Jared had been running the company, and they wanted to kind of say, Goodbye, New Jersey. They were angry at Chris Christie, the prosecutor who put him away and who was then governor. So they wanted to say, the hell with you, New Jersey. We're going to New York. We're going to the big time. And so they bought in 2007 this building, 666 Fifth Avenue. Now, that was the height of the market when prices were as high as they'd ever been. And it was right before the crash. And, buy high and sell low is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to buy low and sell high. So Jared bought this building, and Charlie got out. They announced it when Charlie got out of prison. They paid more than any other building in the history of New York City, $1.8 billion, and they had to take out a huge amount of debt. And within a year, the real estate market crashed. And so all of a sudden, here's this building with a huge mortgage on it, several mortgages, because in complicated real estate deals, you have one mortgage and then there's something called mezzanine debt. And so you're paying a lot of you're paying a lot of interest, you're paying a lot of service fees, and all of a sudden the market crashes, and they have this big boondoggle on their hands, and it eventually threatens to bring down the whole company. So this goes on. They sell pieces of it, they refinance it. But by the time Jared gets into the White House, things are really desperate. The underlying mortgage that they had was due in February 2018. It was more than $1 billion, $1.2 billion mortgage they had to pay, and they didn't have the cash for it. So in 2015, they travel the world. This is before the Trump presidential campaign. They travel the world trying to get investors. First, they went in the U.S. They put on a book trying to get people to invest in it. People who looked at it said there's something interesting about this book. There's these great pictures about they're going to knock down the old building, put up a new building. It looks like something from Emerald City, but there's no numbers in it. And so people say, how can you expect us to invest when we don't know what the financials are? They got to take it back. Now they put numbers in. People look at the numbers and they say, oh, that's why you didn't put the numbers in, because they don't make any sense. There's no way you'll get rents that high in Manhattan. This building, you're asking us to invest in something that is not going to make us money. So by 2015, the Kushners are trying to go overseas to get money. They go to some of the richest people in the world, the head of LMVH, the richest man in France. They go to Saudi Arabia trying to get this company, an investor who runs a real estate company that does shopping malls. They go to the South Korean Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is a fund that is of the government's money that is invested in private projects. No one wants to take their meetings until Jared enters Donald Trump's campaign. By late 15, when Trump is starting to lead in the polls, all of a sudden people will at least take their meetings. They're not going to invest necessarily, but they're taking their meetings. And this is what has continued, after Trump's election.
What is a simple way, because this is so important, but what is a simple way to explain, to my friends who are like, he's just trying to take care of his family? What is a way just to, I guess, the magnitude of what this means?
From the very beginning of the United States, the founding fathers wanted to set a government where you didn't have kings and princes taking care of their family. And so they tried to set regulations that would keep people in office from acting on their own interests instead of the public interest. And so there's been a long tradition in this country that you set your family business aside and try to look out for the best interests of the country. Wow. And I think that's the questions of conflict of interest that the Kushners and the Trump administration have been in the middle of.
This is what Charles Kushner, Jared Kushner's father, who is a famously private man, and as you mentioned, he is private for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is he had gone to prison about a decade and a half ago for a variety of reasons, one of which was that he had solicited a prostitute to sleep with his brother-in-law and send the videotape to his sister as part of a massive family feud. But this is what Charlie Kushner wrote in the Washington Post today. He said, first, 666 Fifth Avenue was not a big financial loser. Even before we recouped most of the initial investment, the property represented a small portion of the company's overall holdings. The Kushner company's health was fine. Is that accurate? Because my understanding is that they were so desperate for cash that they were trying to develop properties across the river in New Jersey and Jersey City and other locations because that 666 had become such a financial boondoggle that they had no choice but to scrounge around anywhere they could for cash and for investment?
Vanity Fair magazine has called it 666 possibly the worst real estate deal in the history of Manhattan. There were in 2011 building was losing so much money they couldn't pay the mortgage. They had to bring in a special servicer, which is like someone who you bring in when people can't pay their big commercial mortgage. So the building was teetering, and it would have had huge ramifications for the entire company. They got a refinance then. By 2015 and 2016, again. There's another mortgage due now, and it threatened to take the company down. If you look at what happened once Trump was elected, in the transition period, Jared Kushner started reaching out to all kinds of people who he would deal with later on once he was in the White House, trying to get them to invest. And they were so desperate they went to one company called Angbang. It's a Chinese investment company, but it is so closely linked to the Chinese government that the U.S. considers it almost a part of the Chinese government. Like President Obama was not allowed to stay in a hotel that they own because they thought, it would leave the potential of spies owning it, of spies listening into it, and they're not allowed to invest near U.S. military bases. Well, Jared goes during the transition, meets with the head of Angbang, and gets them to agree. A few weeks before the inauguration, when he's going to be one of the most powerful people in the U.S. government, and agrees to make this huge investment in 666 Fifth Avenue, a building which no one else would touch before. Not only did they agree to invest, but it was a gigantic boon to the Kushners. It would have put like $400 million of cash in their pockets. It would have given them far more ownership in the new building than their equity would have deserved. It would have been, in the end, about $2 billion it was such a sweet deal. It would have been about a $2 billion favor for the Kushners. They also met with the Qataris, with a guy who used to be the head of the Qataris government fund and was the foreign minister of Qatar. And they got him to agree to put in $400 million. So, they were so desperate. They were doing deals, trying to do deals with, people that would have posed a conflict. Fortunately, when we wrote about those deals, they fell apart. We wrote about the Angbang deal, and Charlie Kushner had to fly to China to try to save it, but there was so much, so much public outcry about how bad it was that they had to drop the deal.
Why is Qatar is saying now that they were unwittingly had bailed out 666, that essentially through they're a huge investor in Westfield Properties, which are Brookfield Asset Management, I apologize, for who were the actual company that bailed out 666. So how is it that Qatar, which has been, as you mentioned, bailing out the Kushners for a while, suddenly now claiming they were unaware of this major investment in 666?
That is a great mystery. There's one story that came out a few weeks ago by an unnamed source in Qatar who supposedly said they were shocked that their money was bailing out the Kushners. But if you look at the history and the timeline of what happened, that doesn't make sense. And no one has been, even in Qatar, has been willing to say that on the record. By March 17, with the clock ticking on the Kushners, it's now less than a year till that big mortgage is due. Charlie Kushner meets with the foreign minister of Qatar in Washington. Charlie says, he invited me. We didn't talk about investments. I couldn't have done it anyway. By May, Brookfield, there's talk of there being a blockade against Qatar, where the U.S. is backing some Gulf states who wanted to cut off Qatar financially, which was a very crippling financial thing to do to them. Lo and behold, by May, Brookfield Properties, which is owned 25%, the biggest shareholder in that company, and 25% of the money is the Qatari government, starts to invest with the Kushners. No one has ever gotten to the root of it. I think that's one of the big investigations that we're going to see play out in the next over the next year. The Congress, now that Democrats are there, are subpoenaing records, and I think that over time we're going to see what happened there. In most real estate deals, if you're a 25% majority partner, you're going to be involved in those big decisions. And anyone you talk to in real estate say it would be unthinkable for them to not know it. We will find out in time.
And what, explain this to me too, because Qatar and Saudi Arabia have had a massive diplomatic crisis for the last couple of years. Essentially, they're fighting over hegemony in the Gulf. And what makes no sense to me is that Qatar has been incredibly financially supportive of the Kushner family. Why is it that Jared Kushner has developed this very close relationship? What is it that the Saudis are providing to him that makes him so close to a man who has been accused very credibly of murdering an American resident and of causing massive havoc across the Middle East?
Well, if you look at the record of what has happened there, the discussions and some of the actions, it seems like there's a mix of policy and financial interests that merge. The policy is that, Jared, his number one task, according to President Trump, is to try to bring peace to the Middle East. And one of his ways of doing that is to use Saudi Arabia and Jordan and as a counterbalance to Iran. And because so many people in the administration are very concerned about Iran, they walked away from the Iran nuclear deal, that Saudi Arabia has played that very much to its own advantage. And both as a counterbalance to Iran and as a part of the more complicated plan, he has to try to mitigate the Israeli-Palestinian issue. The Saudis would play a key part of that. So that's the policy piece, and that's why Jared thinks that whatever eggs have to get broken to make this omelet, it's worth it. But there's also financial interest. And, in 2017, Jared secretly went over we call this Jared's secret sleepaway, where he went to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia and for 4 days was there with Mohammed bin Salman. He was there. He came right at the end of a week where the Saudis' sovereign wealth fund, which is the Saudi $100 billion fund of Saudi money that the government was going to invest. There was a convention where all these would-be investors go there and are trying to pitch them to get the Saudis to give them money. So for 4 days, here's this convention. Tom Barrack, who is a Trump advisor who has helped the Kushners with business before, is there. Joshua Kushner, who is Jared's brother and a co-owner of this company called Cadre, he was there. And lo and behold, we did a story about 5 months later that Cadre, a company where Jared is still an owner, and his brother Josh was about to get a $100 million investment from SoftBank, which is a Japanese bank which has 20% of its money comes from the Saudi government. So when we wrote about that, the SoftBank walked away from that as well. But it's clear that their interests have aligned in both financial ways and policy ways.
Do you think he's being influenced because of his relationship, and a relationship that goes back to his father with the Netanyahu government, in terms of aligning himself with the Saudis right now to the detriment of Iran?
The Kushner family goes way back with Netanyahu. There's a story that when Charlie Kushner was so close with Netanyahu that one time he stayed in the Kushner's family home in New Jersey, and he actually slept in Jared's bed, and Jared, slept somewhere else, but he was a guest in the house and he stayed in Jared's room while Jared slept somewhere else. So it is an incredibly tight relationship. It is no secret that the Kushners that, both Jared and his father and his family have been very supportive of Israel. His father gives a lot to Israeli causes, has invested or has given money to some charities that are building homes on the West Bank, which is a very politically charged thing because that makes it harder to, have some sort of land for peace initiative with the Palestinians. So there's a very close relationship there. I've not talked to Jared about it. He claims that he's looking out for everyone's best interest, but I know that in a lot of discussions there are those on the Palestinian side who believe that he's not open-minded, and so I think that the Saudi involvement in that plan certainly is one of the things that makes him want to do business with MBS.
If you could ask Jared 2 questions right now about his relationship with him, what would they be?
I would ask him 2 questions. One would be, how is it that you think people should view you as a neutral actor in government when you have business interests that overlap with all the areas you're dealing with, and why is it that you didn't take the steps that people have taken for generations to separate that? And the second is why is it that you are willing to look the other way for the Saudi government and MBS's the evidence that looks like they were involved in the murder of Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist? Other countries, other people in government, other business leaders have looked at the evidence that the U.S. and the Turkish intelligence have said makes clear that he was involved in it. Yet Jared and a few others have tried to explain it away. How is it that you can do that? Can I get a third question?
Of course.
Okay. My third question would be, the Kushner family has a fascinating history. His parents, his grandparents were not just Holocaust survivors. They were heroes of the Holocaust. They helped people in Belarus escape the Nazis. They dug tunnels, and about 85 people managed to escape the Nazis, and they were the leaders of this escape. And there's Holocaust museums in Russia where the Kushner's family is honored for that. His grandparents then came to this country, started building, and Jared has been in an administration that has not spoken out against anti-Semitism here, most markedly after the Charlottesville demonstrations. At which point, while there was torches and KKK members who were being racist, they were also threatening Jews there. And there was a synagogue where people were worshiping on a Saturday, and they had to sneak out the back door because people with guns were outside and chanting, anti-Semitic chants. Given his family's history, how can he be? Why is it that he didn't speak out when, after those demonstrations, the president said there are very fine people on both sides?
But to your reporting, you deal with so much information and such in-depth stories. How do you, in your work ethic, not get overwhelmed and kind of follow all of these? Because in so many of your stories, you just lay it out so well, but you're dealing with so much information and so many tax numbers and detailed things. How do your process not go crazy?
I've spent years writing about complicated business dealings. I did Apple's taxes and GE's taxes and Goldman Sachs when they found a way to rig the aluminum market. So I'm used to doing big, complicated cases, but this is something all its own. And, people ask, what's it like? And I think the best way to describe it is, the game we all like to play where we get the puppy to chase after the laser pointer. This is like being a puppy, like in a laser tag arcade, because there's hundreds of things where it's all chasing it and you get what you can, and then you run over there and there's 10 more over here. So I do think, when this story started, those of us who cover it, it starts as a sprint, and then you realize, whoa, it's going to be a marathon. But each one is its own little thing. So you try to run it like a relay race. And I'm lucky that at Bloomberg we have a big team of a lot of good people. So, I'll try to run on this one as long as I can. And when I need to collapse, someone else they'll hand the baton to someone else. And we have 3 or 4 different teams going like that. But it is unlike anything that I've ever seen.
Why do you think Ivanka was not one of the people that was targeted by the original Nadler document request?
I'm sorry, by the original
Nadler document request. You talked about that Gerald Nadler had sent out requests for documents for a variety of people, including Jared Kushner, but not Ivanka Trump. Why do you think that is? Right.
I know that was one. There were 2 omissions that jump out to me. One was Ivanka and one was Kellyanne Conway, right? Why would she not be asked questions? Because she was in the middle of a lot of this and was a very top advisor and privy to a lot of conversations. We all try to play criminologist and say things. I think Nadler afterward said that they aren't finished sending things out yet, so maybe there are more. There is speculation all over the place that maybe, when people aren't named, that they could be cooperating. But Nadler seemed to try to throw a little bit of cold water on that by saying they still have more things to send out, but there were so many they wanted to get the first batch out, when they could.
All right, we're going to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck on the story. If the Mueller report drops, we can't wait to read all about it.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.